Hello and welcome back to our show, Crossroads of Cognizance. If you are, we just clicked live, so you're probably not even here yet. But if you are with us, welcome back. This is the show where we have created an online discussion and community that incorporates magic, spirituality, energy work, energy, all things energy. And we talk about different things that are going on, different realizations we've had, experiences, tips and tricks for you guys. And then we take from what you guys are sharing with us in the comments section to really create this sort of I want to say roundtable discussion, but I've seen other people do the roundtable discussions. It's kind of ruined it for me. But we're trying to create something interesting here. So we're glad you've joined us. Hi, Bram. Um, and hi to everybody else that I can't see, but if you want to drop hi in the comments, you can. Hi, Bounder. And so now that you're here, hopefully, if you're on Facebook, you've clicked the live stream so we can see your comments. If you're on YouTube, you're dropping in the hellos, the likes, the how you doings, and just keeping up with us, sharing your thoughts. So before we go any further, we probably should introduce ourselves in case you're new here. And so I am Dahlia Rose. I'm the founder of the Conduit School, and I serve my community as a healer, a teacher, and a conduit for high vibrational energies. Hello, Willow. I like to pull together ancient healing modalities and supportive practices that bring transformation to the people who choose to work with me. And I do this because I want to expand the way that we deal with healing. I want to reconnect us with our bodies, and I really want to empower people to feel and be more than they ever thought they could possibly be. And the funny thing about that is, I was talking to somebody and I was like, well, I think I do this because this is what I want for myself. so selfish reasoning, but I love giving it out to others. But I'm not here alone by any means.
Hi, everybody. I'm Katrina Raspold. I'm half of Crossroads Occult at crossroadsoccult.com. And my husband and I make and sell magical products. And we have an actual apothecary room in our house where we make all sorts of hoodoo products, candles. And I also do tarot and oracle card Lenormand readings for people. I do spiritual cleansings and I do focused spell work for people. And that's pretty much how I spend my days. I retired from active retail service about, several months ago, last October.
It's almost been a year.
And I know it's coming up on a year. It's crazy. So I'm enjoying the retired life very much. And I'm retired and work part time, basically, is what it comes down to. And my husband and I are also founding members of Northwestern Circles Association, which means that we host the Pangaya Festival in Fair Oaks, California every year. It's a huge festival with vendors and presentations and live music and opportunity drawings and all kinds of stuff. So we're got that coming up. That's a real big thing for us on June 17th and 18th. And that's how we spend our time. I kind of tease Eric a little bit because he is still in his warrior phase. You know, he's younger than I am, and so he got to retire when I retired because we worked together. And so he's living the life. He's living the dream. He's usually out rock climbing or on the water, paddle boarding, or doing something uniquely adventurous. And that's not me. I'm more of a stay home and meditate kind of person. So that's me. That's what I do. Eric and I have 6 kids, and they're all adults out there loose in the world. I also have written 30 something books. I don't remember how many it was. I think it was close to 40 actually. And we are about to release the last 2 in the Seven Sisters of Avalon series, which is
Woohoo!
an amazing series. I say that only because I'm not responsible for it. I'm just the midwife. I just birthed it out. And it's about 7 women in post Arthurian Avalon, and they're just some of my favorite people ever. So that's me. That's what I do. Um, I'm just excited to see specifically Willow and Bram here. They're part of my tribe, and if Willow's here, MJ might be here as well. That's her partner. So yeah, just glad to be here. We're having an unseasonably cool stretch in California right now. We were super hot for me anyway, in the upper 80s and into the 90s, and then there was just this 10-degree drop, and so it's downright kind of chilly coming in my window right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, you may or may not be able to tell, but I am in like a slight sweater because we got the same thing. I mean,
Wow.
waking up with family and going, why is winter turned back on? Like, somebody get the thermostat. So,
Willow, we're going to share an inside joke here. I'm just going to say, you know how to wake him up. So,
now,
yeah.
so we gather here every Thursday and we talk about multiple things. Sometimes we repeat our topics, and that's going to be it for me today because we're bringing our ancestors back around. We definitely have had this conversation surrounding Day of the Dead and different things like that. And I found myself back in a place of contemplation about ancestors and their support and things like that again, um, through for a place of both healing and reconnection. So today's topic is, if you saw it, maybe you saw the preview, it's the opportunity to connect with your ancestors when you feel lost. And it's such a flowery, like you can always tell when I come up with the topic because it's going to be some flowery thing that you're like, what the hell is she talking about? And, um, here's what it is. When I find that when people seek me out, one of the key phrases that they will say is, "I feel lost. I feel like I have no direction, etc." And um, more recently, what I have seen as a possible way of getting back on a path is to reconnect with your ancestors. And you might be thinking like, oh, does that mean make an altar? Does that mean do this? Does that mean do that? Sometimes it is that, and other times it's an awareness of what your ancestors did that did not work, or beliefs they held that are no longer valid for you. And so your process of regaining a sense of direction and a sense of self is to excise those beliefs and move in a completely different direction. So that's what we're talking about here today, guys. So, one of the things that feels important to kind of get on with, because that was long, we took the scenic route to get to the topic, is who are your ancestors? Like who's considered an ancestor? So I feel like that's anybody in your bloodline that came before you, but also people that married into your family, people that were adopted. They become an energetic access point for you to connect with different traditions, different awarenesses. And so now that I've said that, there's space for people that you make a part of your family, like fully transparently. I hope I get to keep Katrina forever, but I know that's not the case. Physical form, anyway. But she will be one of my ancestors after our physical interaction.
Depends on when you die. You might be one of my ancestors.
Fair.
Let's not close any doors here.
Fair. But to say that your wisdom and your energy and your love is invaluable is the greatest understatement I could make. And so, at a soul level, you're kind of stuck with me each lifetime. So,
I do think when we're looking at now, one of my biggest resources for ancestor work is Gladys Gordillo, of course, who is
mhm.
the queen of ancestor work. She's our medium that worked through our store, and so she and I had a lot of conversations about this, and we talked a lot about what qualifies as your ancestor. And I agree with everything that you've said. I don't know that, and there are some people that believe that we are entitled to ancestry as being just part of the human race. So because
Oh,
we're
interesting.
human, that we have an interconnectedness with everyone,
Hmm.
which, okay, I'm cool. That's, but then they go on to say, so if I am very inspired by Maya Angelou, for instance, I can consider her to be one of my ancestors. Well, I'm thinking, can
Yeah, it's
you?
a stretch. It's a bit of
Can
a,
you?
it's a bit of a stretch. Now, if you met her, sat down with her, you were a
Right.
part of
If
her
you were
life.
mentored by her, if you
Yeah.
were her
Yeah.
best friend, if you were her next door neighbor, if you had an energetic connection beyond, this is an amazing person. They have created responses in me that I wanted.
Mhm.
I don't think that's enough. I think it has to be an actual um, deeper connection than that. But if I were to say that, I don't know, my ex mother in law is one of my ancestors. I had fortunately, no blood relation to her, but she was a very interesting and complex woman who changed the way I felt and thought by our physical connections, our time spent together. So I think a little closer to that would be more of what you're talking about. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Extensive time, deeper connections.
Dead.
Um, very much dead.
All the
For
qualifications that are lining up here.
now, what's interesting is you brought forward this piece of being drawn to somebody, and for me, one of the things that feels okay is to explore someone's draw towards a culture, right?
Yes.
Ancestry.com and like all of those places that are exploring DNA, it always makes for a really interesting moment when somebody's like, I'm 1% black. And it's like, okay, well,
You're in the
okay.
club. Yay.
But if you feel like drawn to a particular culture, as we're talking about like this feeling of being lost, there's even space for that, I think. Like you could have lifetime connections to that, maybe ancestral lifetimes connections to that. So like it can get really complicated and really convoluted, but at the end of the day, um, seeking something in your background, something in your past is kind of the target focus.
Now, one
And
of the things, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
I was going to jump topic a little bit. So go ahead if you
Okay.
had something to add.
No. Let's take the
Well,
roller coaster.
one of the aspects of this conversation that's particularly vital, I think, in order to curate the direction our conversation goes, as if there is ever any curating or design or control over the direction our conversations go on and off camera. I would have to say that the most operative thing you're talking about is utilizing this as a tool when you feel lost. Now, one of the most common things I run into, I get a lot of counseling with people, lots and lots of times to engage with people about what's going on in their life right now. And the original premise of this show was to talk about contrasts and continuities and uh, comparisons between what's happening in your shop and what's happening in my shop when we're engaging with students and clients. And one of the things we're both running into is a almost universal reflection to the idea of people feeling lost. And also, I get a lot of comments about people feeling stuck. They
Mm,
feel like that they can't move forward. They feel like they're being blocked from moving forward. And I think that that's a form of feeling lost because you don't know what to do next. You don't know what is holding you back. And so that causes you to just feel adrift. And I'm really seeing this a lot in people just in the last month, I would say. I think part of that is we are starting to fully transition out of the COVID crisis. It's still there. People are still getting sick. People are still enduring hardship over some of the effects of having been sick. We have the workforce possibly forever changed by insights that we gained through COVID. We have ideas for what is essential and what is not essential in terms of workers. There's just been a redefinition of the labor force in general, I think, as a result of COVID and also schooling. So it's really touched so many parts of everybody's life that I think that that's part of what makes us feel so adrift right now, is that we're having to live with experiences we didn't ever have before, and that most of us have no frame of reference for. We had a similar thing that happened with the Gulf War when
Mm.
it was really underway, and we had a lot of people, a lot of service people being shipped out. Most people who were being shipped out or having their spouses shipped out, and particularly having their parents ship out, had not had any experience with the idea of actual war. There hadn't really been much of an engagement since Vietnam. And so they didn't know what to do with that idea. And they had some really unusual expectations in regard to it. I worked at the OBGYN clinic when it really got crazy. And we had all these women saying, "You've got to bring my husband back. I'm going to deliver next week." And well, no, that's not how it works.
Right.
And so people had to adapt into what that felt like. And now we're having to adapt into a new way of being. We're also having to adapt into a whole lot of anger and frustration that's going on out there in the world. And a lot of us aren't used to that. I have so many more people now that say, "I just can't people anymore. I can't go out there in the fray anymore and feel comfortable like I used to." All the mass shootings, people are having to really, I've had so many people to say, "I'm changing my vacation plans because I'm afraid to be in public places now." So people are having real life changing experiences. And when that happens and you're having to regroup your worldview, I think that's a time when people tend to feel lost or as though nothing's moving forward. And as a people, we tend to not be comfortable moving forward when that's going on. We feel like too much is moving forward. So I personally am going to be very, very still and not move. So this idea that you had, I got real excited when I saw the topic because it was one that you chose, of tapping into ancestral energy in order to ground yourself and figure out what's going on. I thought that sounded wonderful. I like what you said about ancestry.com, because if you are doing any type of genetic or genealogy work, one of the things that you're going to get in your reports, most likely, depending on the level you engage with these companies, is something that discusses your predispositions.
Oh,
And things like, what is your your predisposition to depression? What is your predisposition to gluten intolerance? I mean, there's all sorts of things that will come up in that regard, and that is based on your genealogy. Which, guess what? Your genealogy is your ancestors. When you look at your genealogy, like you were saying, somebody might see 1% Black. What is the other 99% doing? Are you 80% Italian? Well, guess what? If you go back and research what was happening in Italy, specifically the region you're from, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, you're going to see some of your roots and what is emblazoned or stamped onto your genetic makeup. What memories does your latent or active genetic makeup carry? And knowing those things can really give you a foundation of stability and feeling as though you are part of a group. And when you feel like you're part of a group, you feel like you've got ancestors behind you, you feel mighty. You feel like you have a team behind you. And when we do the Olympias, the cleansings, and we see those little effervescent bubbles along the jar, we know that person has their team. They've got their spirit guides. They've got their ancestors lined up, whether they know it or not. So I do think that what you have brought up for this topic is extremely important, and I'm excited that we're addressing it.
So one of the things that was clear in some of the examples that you gave, regarding where we are and why we feel lost, and sort of COVID and things like that, and the Gulf War, is how
What a
cornerstone.
ramble, man. As you lay it out like that, I'm like, what a fucked up speech that was.
No,
I just
no,
went,
no.
oh,
But the key component, the most obvious thing in being lost in those examples, was that cornerstones were removed. And one of those big
yes,
cornerstones, um, in this most recent pandemic, huh?
I'm agreeing, but I don't know what side you're
Oh.
on, so I'm pointing to both. What said yes, cheers, yes, good.
Was I was like, oh, I don't, am I on mute? I don't understand. Um, was the one of the cornerstones that was gone, was the elderly. Like, so many older people left. I remember being, I was
Ooh,
channeling
good, yeah.
a a intergalactic collective, so full trance channel. I'm out there talking, and they were like, get the stories from your elderly. And this was in 2019. And I was like, well, that's a cryptic message. What's going on? And then to see the result of that in 2020 was quite startling. And now the cornerstones that were removed leave us feeling displaced. Who are we? The other thing that was in your line of thinking that was obvious was how certain identities are removed when things start to change. So you see, again, your older parents or whoever exit your life, you have to figure out who you are on your own. I think that sometimes, even if it is not the case that you are losing people in mass, and if you are, I mean, God, that's awful. We're not minimizing that. But even those who didn't, go through a place in their life, they reach a point, maybe it's the midlife crisis, where they start to say, who am I without X, Y, and Z? And oftentimes we try to trace that forward. So we go to the psychic, we go to the medium, we go to, whomever we can get our hands on, friends, family, or trusted individuals, and we ask, where should I be? What should I be doing? And this conversation about looking to your ancestors is an opportunity to actually look backwards. What did they do? What were they involved in? I love what you said about, seeing what's in your genealogy, what's in your energetic makeup, I mean, really, like, what's in your tissues, because your tissues are a continuation of who came before you. Everything about you, the kind of love that you give others, is a continuation of the love that began before you. And so on and so forth, even the not so pretty things. Um, so with that, it seems like I feel like this is such a new agey concept, but this is something that we have done for since humans existed. I mean, Catholics worship dead saints. In Hispanic culture, they have celebration to keep the soul of the loved one who's departed and the ancestors who have departed, to keep that alive, keep those souls alive. And I found a really interesting culture, like, so I'm the consummate, where can I find this on Google? And there are people, and I'm going to probably butcher the pronunciation of this, and knowing our fantastically smart audience, if you have corrections, please correct me. But the Toraja people, Toraja, Toraja, they will keep their dead family members in their homes and continue to feed the body, and or at least put food out for the body. And sometimes, if the body's too decrepit, they start scaling that back in order to, bring, like, just bring them out for more reverent moments. But these are them continuing to go back to their ancestors in more traditional ways. Eastern cultures will do this as far as keeping their dead, keeps continuing to celebrate their dead in temples and things like that. And so, it can be very interesting how we go back and reconnect with our ancestors. Um, but what about the opportunity to say, the situation that I'm going through, it's possible that my ancestors went maybe Deb is answering your question. Katrina was like, there's another culture that does that as well. um the Qingming, I think, bringing out their dead again. Anyway, what if we were considering, did my ancestors go through this thing that I am going through right now, and how did they handle it? For instance, one of the things that I like to look at is ancient ways that people did healing practices or meditation or things like that. And when I look at shamanic work, dance is heavily involved, and shaking and moving, and this is how they converted energy and got answers and things like that. And I look at how still our culture is when it comes to healing work and things like that, and how for some, when they get into ecstatic dance, it's a very healing moment, and to me that connects across
Yeah.
culture. So if we asked, were my people dancing people, there's an opportunity there. But I'm jumping way ahead because we have tons of amazing comments here, so I want to
Yes,
get
we
into
do.
those.
So when we're
um
talking about the cultures that actually do work with the dead in terms of digging them up or preserving their bodies and working with the deads, uh, that's that's taking one for the team. That's going all the way to the finish line. But I tell you what, you want zombies because that's how you get zombies. Okay. Um, I love my parents. I am so sorry they're gone. I miss them every single day. I have so many loved ones that have passed, and especially in the last 3 or 4 years. Part of it's getting older, part of it is COVID, part of it is that weird death gate that we had that blew open with COVID, where all of a sudden people are dying left and right of non COVID related problems. And even though COVID's happening, we got people dying of all these other things too, all of a sudden, more so than usual. So I've lost a lot of people in the last 4 or 5 years, and I miss them all dearly. I do not want them at my dinner table. I just don't. And I'm more in the Deb's field here. We do have an altar of the dead every Samhain where we put out some of their favorite foods. Now this is as a group. I'm talking about my entire witchy commune. We we put out pictures and memorabilia. Eric's mother, for instance, was a nurse, and he puts out her ID badge for the hospital, and just different things like that to make us feel closer, help us feel closer to them, feel like that it opens the door wider for their spirit to come visit. But I do not feel even a cultural or driving personal need to engage with their decaying flesh.
Fair, absolutely fair.
Just
I
me.
don't think I would either. And yes, to this point here, um,
Hmm.
how distant we were. That's where I was going. I was like, my brain
Yeah.
had this freeze moment. And let's see. So now going back to the pandemic norm seems like a return to something less than sincere. That's interesting. So I guess the conversation that we're having today is an opportunity to maybe bring some sincerity into your practices from a place of, how was I connected to my family previously? How did my family connect to themselves when they had to go through these things? I mean, I realize probably from a uh, technological advanced, we've advanced pretty far ahead of some of the things that people before us did not have to go through. And at the same time, there may be a similar frequency of something like the FOMO that you feel may have been the same uh, frequency of loneliness that somebody felt when their community ostracized them or kicked them out. And that's why FOMO feels so potent at times. And when I say, I realize that some people don't know
Mhm.
what feeling of missing out, why that can feel so detrimental is because you're still tapped into the frequency and the connection of the family member who went through that. Well, what did they do to survive? Did they, build their own new tribe? Did they, how did they navigate that? And you may not have a full sense of what that is because you don't have somebody to talk to, but meditation is available. We talked about ancestry.com and those kind of things because if you were part of a certain tribe, maybe they had a ceremony or something that they did. It's worth the looking into and the feeling into, because it doesn't have to be exactly right. But what we're talking about is potentially an inspired approach to your own healing. Or you go, like Katrina said, I'm not digging up my family members, and you go clear across the other direction in order to seek out your own healing.
Well, I'll metaphorically dig them up. I'll communicate with them. I'll meditate on who they were, the ones I know, who they
Right,
were
right,
as people. What would Jesus do? What would Granny do? That sort of thing. And connect with their spirit. I just don't want to hold their hand or literally feed them or engage with their dead body. But then, that being said, y'all, I am the person that when my mother died, now she had sisters, and I mean, this was a pack. She had sisters, and they got really upset with me because I didn't have any interest in going up to the coffin and seeing her dead.
Mm.
And the reason I didn't do that is because many years before, I guess it was around 15 years before, I had done that with my father, because that's what you do. And I touched his hands, and I looked at him, and I kissed his forehead, and I rubbed his hair. I wanted to emblaze on my memory what he looked like. And the way that it occurred is that I couldn't not remember that. I had to get around that imagery to remember my memories about him and other things about him. It was such a prominent experience. I didn't want that for my mother. I wanted her to be animated and engaged like she was the last time I had seen her. And
Mm.
so that's part of it too, is I don't enjoy looking at dead people. And it's not a scared thing. It's a matter of I don't feel like they're there. I don't, when I am working, I've done a lot of energetic work with dead people. It would surprise some of the audience. Dahlia knows this. How many people want energy work done on their loved ones who have passed to clear out any negativity that might be weighing their soul down, to absolve them of perceived sins, whatever it might be. And so I've worked with dead bodies a lot, and it feels the same to me as when you're standing over the meat counter at the grocery store. I mean, it's just inanimate, um, unengaged flesh. And even with my parents, it didn't feel like they were in there. I couldn't equate what I was seeing to the arms that held me, the hands on my face. It felt very foreign to me. I think that that's what it's about. This is
Mm.
probably related to something my ancestors did to distance themselves from dead people.
Well, so what Bram said here is interesting. I had no idea. Um,
Our parlors are now called, yeah.
sorry, I
We
switched.
did that when I was young. I remember having wakes. We didn't call them wakes, but we called it sitting up with the dead. And so we didn't. Later, we used funeral homes, and I was born in '61. But I remember when I was real little, them bringing the coffin to the house in different situations. And then, yeah, you sat with them overnight and held vigil, kind of, not because you thought anything was going to happen, but just to spend time with that energy. I did not personally do it, but I knew people who had in our family because I was really little. And then the next day, you had people over, and they brought funeral food, and you had your celebration of life right there in the home.
So this is we did kind of touch on this question. Um, so when working with your ancestors, do they have to be your bloodline? I've heard a couple of these, just to get your input. So we did kind of touch on that in the beginning. Um, bloodline adopted. I mean, so don't look for a concrete answer here because on this show ever, I don't think you're ever gonna. It's never gonna be. These are the rules. And so
It'd be
spending
a
this.
short show if we just looked at the camera and said, "Yep."
Yeah, or it came on, you probably wouldn't be watching if it was just like, hey, this is
Yeah.
how you follow it, this is what you do. Because I think that there's so life is so vast and complicated that to say it ancestors only have to be your bloodline to me feels so religious. So I kind of arm's length that one. It's so funny, like us and our society, human beings, and our rules. I want to go off on a tangent because I ran into another fixed viewpoint on a completely different subject, and I kind of run away from those. I met a man recently who said, Dale Hoffman, he's amazing. He's like, I never nail my furniture to the floor. And I was like, yes, Dale, that makes sense. Why? Because your beliefs can always change. You can always grow to learn more. But the short answer to your question is no, they don't have to be your bloodline. But you can't, per Katrina's example, you cannot adopt Maya Angelou.
Well, and that's something we got to really look at there. And it's a difficult conversation to have. I mean, it really is. Because on one hand, you don't ever really know what your bloodline is.
Right.
You just don't. And you don't know whose aunt is really their mom. You don't know whose dad really isn't who you thought it was. And it's less so all the way back through history because
Right.
they were some lying assholes back then. They just had to, just report very loosely. And a lot of the genealogies that we have come from census reports where it's just presumed somebody's your child. And even back in uh, early Roman times, all a man had to do to claim a child was to literally raise it to his knee. He just had to put the child up on his knee, and that was then his child. So, I mean, you
That's
don't
the
know.
scariest paternity test on the planet.
Yeah, it was a way of saying, I accept this child as my own, therefore this child is my own.
Right.
And so, there's all kinds of branches on the family tree that maybe were grafted on there and you just didn't notice. So there's that, but there's also the idea of it's a real tightrope that I experienced myself, so I can speak to it a little bit. When you are energetically and profoundly drawn to a culture that by genealogical standards is not your own, you are in dangerous territory. And I just sort of ran into it because it had been so long since something called me. It had been decades since I felt really moved by something spiritually to the point of me saying, this is going to reshape how I view magic, how I view my spirit. And it happened, and I was invited in by people of that culture. I got fantastic tutelage under them. And then the world chewed me up to the point that now in my marketing, I do not even mention the culture anymore because it was just too hard. It was hurting people, and I did not ever intend that. And so you've got to really be careful if you are reaching out to something that is far beyond what is legitimately your genealogical connection. And it doesn't mean that you can't engage it. It doesn't mean you can't honor it. It doesn't mean you can't put it on your ancestry altar. It's yours. You can do whatever you want to. But when you begin discussing those concepts in public, you have to be very careful because the pushback you get can be really hurtful and people can be very aggressive about that.
And I definitely think it can be based on the culture. I mean, one of the cultures that I feel is particularly inviting is like Hinduism. So there are a number of
Mm-hmm.
gods and deities in that culture, and it almost seemed I've never come across where they feel like cultural appropriation is deeply embedded in some of the stuff that they have to endure. In fact, it's almost like, no, take this and take it out into the world and make it your own kind of thing. But you're right, there is a level of awareness that one has to have when they feel drawn to another culture. I think the bridge point is, you know, uh, interacting with people, and like you said, being invited and things of that nature, rather than just deciding like, oh, I like the way this looks, I like the pattern on these fabrics, I'm gonna all of a sudden this is my culture.
Right.
So it's very
One
interesting.
thing that I like to think of it in terms of is the idea of dual citizenship. Now, my son lives in Canada and has for 20 years and was born and raised in America. So he has dual citizenship between the two countries. Now, could he legitimately say that there are people in Canada that inspire him, that he feels close to, that he has spent the last 20 years with, and they could be considered his ancestors? I believe, sure. Absolutely. If we have a child from China who's adopted by somebody in Italy when he's 5 years old, raised in an Italian family, would I deny that child the right to consider some of those Italians his ancestors? Absolutely not. Would I deny that child the right to consider some Chinese people to be his ancestors? Absolutely, I would not. So it's I like you said, it's an energetic and experiential factor that comes into play when somebody's your ancestor, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, speaking of connection and how you feel connected, this is an interesting comment to me because what we're talking about here is an app not necessarily needing to feel connected. So, what I wanted to address is like if you haven't heard a story about someone or you never met them, how hard it is to feel connected. On the topic at hand, as far as reaching backward and seeing what's available for you in your bloodline or your cultural connections, you don't have to feel connected. You're simply taking a look at the practice and seeing how that feels on you. It's like trying on your great grandmother's wedding dress, and you never met her. Now the dress is ugly, and do you really want to put it on, and it smells weird? Okay, no, but you put it on because the fabric is something that your family has designated as its own, and then from there you might tailor it, you might redesign it, you might only take a ribbon off of it because the rest is falling apart, whatever the case is. So that's the offering and the attempt at bringing that in for your healing. If you, like, for instance, for my family, we have a lot of family from Jamaica and Costa Rica. My family started in Jamaica, went to Costa Rica, and now we dug our roots pretty deep in Costa Rica. And working the land and connecting with the plants and kind of taking care of ourselves and then taking care of the people around us as curanderos, curanderas, um, was what we did. And so for me, entering, like, if I never knew that about my family, and to be fair, I actually only learned that about my family within the last 4 years. Um, I started doing healing work and felt some connection despite how many plants I've killed. I did feel some connection to the herbal and the plant realm. And it was something that when I connected to it, I no longer felt lost. And that's the conversation that we're having now is when you reach for those things, you may feel a sense of connection with the 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 piece that you're working with, maybe not necessarily the people. Although that may come later because you may feel like, oh, well, they did it, I did it, and this is how we're connected. But what we're trying to get a sense of is how can I ground myself when I feel off the path, when I feel like a sense of identity is lost, or when my cornerstone is removed. What did they do? Can I try it? Can I make it my own? And if you're not sure where to start in your lower chakras. From the solar plexus chakra down, that's your ancestors, you, your lineage, your lifetimes, things like that. Or actually, it's just your ancestors and your lineage and things like that. And then go and try something. Feel into those spaces. Do you get a good gut feeling about it? Does it open up your levels of creativity? Do you feel safe when you're doing it? And that can perhaps open up a whole new path for you where you find yourself.
Another angle of ancestor work that I have participated in and really do enjoy is a different type than what we're discussing, which is primarily genealogical and having personally met the people and interacting with them in that way. When there is a shared vocation or experience of some kind, your connection to the pioneers who created what you're doing and who were instrumental in what you're doing is also a really heavy energetic bond. For instance, for 20 years, I was extremely involved with the process of birth. I apprenticed as a midwife. I worked as a doula. I was a childbirth instructor and lactation consultant. And so a lot of what I did revolved around birth. I worked OBGYN, so I'm hands on with these women all the time, every day as my day job. And then went to my night job and did all the teaching. So this was an immersion process that took place over 20 years. And so people like Sheila Kitzinger, Grantley Dick Reed, Frederick Laboyer, people who were pioneering compassionate birth practices for the mother and the baby were an energetic identification that was very strong for me. In witchcraft, for instance, some of the people that were instrumental in my education in that regard, I feel like a strong kinship to them, even more so than I do my genealogical connections, because there is a shared uh, practice. You are with your hands, with your head, uh, doing the actual things that they did over and over and over and over. You are using the equipment that they invented, and so they become so much a part of your life. You feel related to them. You feel like you are carrying on their traditions. You feel like you are growing what they have offered into the world. And so that is another strong aspect of ancestral work that isn't necessarily what a lot of people would consider to be ancestor work, but to me it is. And I spend a lot of time thanking the people who came before me, who blazed the trails that I am able to easily follow. Women's suffrage, I think a lot about the women who couldn't get credit cards, who couldn't buy a home, who didn't have basic rights. And I connect in with those who made that happen energetically. And so in some ways they feel like my ancestors. They feel like the ones that came before that helped to create who I am.
I think that has that's like a great tone for this comment here about you know well, to say this, I think it could be applied to adopted individuals as well. Um, I feel like when you're adopted and you remind people or you seem to connect to ancestors, reminds people of the spirit of those ancestors who raised them. I feel like it's like in those cases, it's an opportunity for you to be a channel or a conduit for the practices to live on. And I think that's really important as well. So
And what about the thousands and thousands and thousands of people that do not know that they were adopted?
mhm. Yeah, like you were saying earlier.
Yeah. Do they just not get ancestry work? I don't think the spirit works that way.
No. So in this conversation, what we're doing is taking an opportunity to we know that there's tons of available practices out there. You can look at your past lives and see what you used to do. You can go and get your healing work. You can um, uh, explore hypnosis, get a reading. I mean, there's so many things that you can do outside of yourself. This is an invitation to go inward. And that inward process can start in your body. One of my favorite teachers that teaches embodiment work talks about the ancestry in our tissues and how when you really bring awareness, apply pressure, and start to unravel and detangle those tissues, you can really bring forward new awarenesses that might lead you down. I mean, you may be laying on a small rubber ball or on a big fitness ball or on a foam roller and suddenly have this awareness or a vision of women carrying water on their heads and you don't know why. There's more to explore now. In the conversation that we're having now, you could go outside and carry water on your head and see how it makes you feel, or you can know what it's like to bring refreshing water, same frequency, to people who don't have it. There's a lot of ways to explore this. This is an invitation to go inward before you take the trip outward to get the readings and to explore the other things and to ask the questions, because that then makes, like, once you've explored inward, once you've connected, you light the candle, you sit in front of your altar, you um, have your conversations with your team, your people, yourself. When you go out and you get the reading and you do the hypnosis, when you explore in new ways, you then get validation. It's no longer, well, is this real or can I trust this? It's like, no, I felt this in my spirit before. I had a connection to this previously. And so now other people feel it too. And it's a very validating experience. It's been super healing for me. I did admittedly take the backwards approach, all this exploration outward, because I wanted nothing to do with my body. But there's so much to offer in the tissues that you have, into the things that you're drawn to, and it's worth the look. It's worth an explanation before you start seeking outward means. So, and it's something we've always done as human beings. We've gotten away from it, and COVID definitely took us away from that. So, a bit of an invitation to you lovely folks. Bram was saying this might be helpful for their anxiety and exploring new opportunities. So, would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. What other ways might you use this? If you've been averse to cooking and you had a cooking family, what would happen if you did? What if you took the class? Like, woo! How might your world open up? And so on and so forth. We'd love to hear the ways that you personally connect and expanding those questions. Like I said, how did your ancestors handle anxiety? How did they handle depression? How did they handle relationship conflicts? And if that question in particular, you might be like, yeah, I'm not doing that, and learn to do better. But it's worth the journey inward. So, any departing thoughts or closing words, Katrina?
Depending on what you're looking to, for lack of a better term, validate or experience in your desire to get less lost, you might also look into some past life regressions to see if maybe there's something outside of this genealogical strain that is relatable to you in some way and helpful to you in some way. I do know some people that feel more connected to their past lives than they do to this life. And that can help them to further understand their own motivations and some of the challenges that they have in their life. But mostly just remember that this is one tool that you can use to leverage yourself out of that feeling of being stuck or that feeling of being lost. But I also want to and I say this to a lot of my clients, I really want to remind everybody that being lost is not necessarily a negative thing. And being stuck is not necessarily a negative thing. We get taught by society we need to be moving forward at all times. We need to expect results at all times. We need to be productive at all times. And you just don't. There are going to be times that you have to be still to let certain activities catch up to where you are so that you can have those experiences. Can you imagine if you were on a carousel and you wanted to grab that brass ring, but your horse is moving faster than the brass ring and it just never seems to get all the way around to catch up? There would come a time where perhaps it would be advantageous to just stop so that other things can catch up to you. So being stuck isn't always bad. Being lost isn't always bad, because I tell you what, I have found some of the coolest locations when I was lost and just driving around or walking around trying to figure out where I'm supposed to be. So sometimes the universe just puts you in what feels like an unfamiliar trajectory so that you can find new aspects of yourself or those around you or of your life experience. So just because you feel stuck or lost doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's not where you expected to be.
And that reminds me of people who say things like, "Well, I feel like I'm sliding backwards," and basically, what I hear you saying is it's not possible. It's just new space that you got to map out. So thank you for that, Katrina. Love that. Well, guys, that is our time. And it was great spending it with you. And we look forward to catching up with you next time on Crossroads of Cognizance. Keep those comments coming, and we'll see you. Bye, everybody.